So last year, we went ahead and talked about iOS versus Android of last year. Now it's time for us to go and talk about stock Android versus stock iOS and see how they're probably going to end up comparing for the remainder of this year. Now, I will definitely tell you if you own an Android phone or if you own an iPhone or if you own an iOS device like this one, you can't really go wrong with either one. They have a lot of features, they have a lot of capability, and I will say there's a lot more similarity nowadays than there have been years and years before. Now, I will tell you, starting off with the outside, I do have the Pixel 7 here, and I do have the iPhone 14 here. I figured these two would be kind of the closest ones to kind of compare to one another. So I do want to start off with the UI and everything like that. So one thing I've actually liked a lot with Android 13 for the most part is the UI has been staying pretty consistent, but there is a lot of customizability that we have within stock Android. So you can always hold down on the display like this, and you can always get inside of your home settings, and you can customize a lot of cool things that we have within our Android device, which is cool. We also have just standard stuff that we can change, like our wallpaper and style. Now, Android 13 didn't really change anything like this. I'm looking forward this year, even with Android 14 coming out. I do think there's going to be one major thing Google's going to change, and that is with the lock screen, and we'll talk about that in a second. But here you can see you have a few customizable things, and I will tell you, you have more things to change overall on your phone on an Android device than on an iPhone. But I do think Google did a good job with this version of Android. You can change the color scheme here and there. You can change to basic colors if you want to, if you just want one consistent color. And you can enable the dark theme. You can do themed icons as well, which is really cool. So this definitely, I would say, from a UI standpoint, we all know the features and the Play Store and whatnot, but I do think the customizability from an Android phone has consistently been better and better, I would say, throughout the life of an Android phone. But what I would say is with an iPhone, with iOS 16, the update we got last year, and maybe going on to this year with iOS 17, although we can't really customize our home screen as much as Android's, like we can't change the colors of things, we can add widgets and whatnot, and maybe theme our icons, not natively using Siri shortcuts. There is one major change that Apple ended up bringing with iOS 16 that I think Android is going to bring with this year, and that is actually with the lock screen. We now have the ability of customizing our lock screen on our iPhone, which is very cool. Now, One UI has this, Samsung has this. Unfortunately, with stock Android with Google, we do not have this within Android 13. So if I hold it down here, you can see there's just nothing to customize like how there is on Samsung. And even on their settings application, there isn't really anything like this. So that has been something that's kind of notoriously been a little sad to me. If we go and type in lock screen, you can see there may be like some passcode option thing like here, but it's not going to be exactly what you're thinking. You can add text to lock screen, you can do some other things, double line clock, but there's not like a customizable panel like we have on here. So we can click customize, we can choose our lock screen like this, and we can add widgets to our lock screen. We can do all sorts of things. Now I think there might be a way to I don't even think there's a way to add applications that I think about it on the bottom either. So that in and of itself, I think, is a pretty big change and a pretty big advantage that you're having on something like stock Android than on iOS. So that has been something, like I said before, that I've noticed. So from the UI and the editing capability of your whole entire phone, that might be something that will, kind of irk you a little bit on Android. Although you can still customize a lot of stuff, and there's probably an application you can download to customize your lock screen, you are getting that type of capability on iOS. So that has been something that we couldn't talk about last year because that wasn't a feature last year. But right now we do have that, which is very nice. Although it's not really like the craziest feature of all time, it is so nice of having a little bit more customizability on our iPhones finally. So I think that in and of itself is easily one of the biggest changes within iOS, and how I kind of feel like, at least with the last version of iOS, Apple has been doing more to kind of push the UI and push editing the home screens and whatnot a little bit more than Android. I feel like that is the one spot where stock Android is kind of taking a L at, to be honest, because they haven't really been pushing too many features, at least in my opinion, compared to iOS, and especially compared to One UI. I'll make a separate video explaining One UI and my differences there, but with stock Android, like I said, I think Google can do a better job here. I think since Android 12, they haven't really been, it's only been one version since then, so I do understand. But I do think Google could do a better job at bringing in more features here. So that is kind of the first thing I want to say. Not a crazy big deal, but it is one of those things that I always mention. Now, if you are very new to Android and iOS and you want a direct thing, one of my favorite features within Android, so I'm not hating it all the time, It's actually with the ability of installing third-party applications. So we still have that capability on Android. You can install and sign your own APK files. There's also, I would argue, better versions sometimes of applications that we don't have on our iPhones. So personally, I like downloading and using some emulators. So on my, Samsung that I typically use for emulation, there's certain emulators like the Dolphin emulator that you can use. There's Citra, which is a really good one. There's a ton of them available, and you can also install your own APK files, basically installing your own apps on your Android phone. On iPhones, we still do not have this capability. However, there are tons of lawsuits and tons of things happening that are making me seem, from all the rumors and everything, are kind of looking like Google and Apple, basically looking like Apple may end up giving us support for these types of capabilities at some point. So I think that is going to be crazy. If we go in general and if we go and get into, device or whatever, VPN and device management, this is where we would typically sign applications. With iOS 16, Apple ended up bringing a little toggle or bringing a little like new pop-up, which basically changed the way it was like developer mode or something like that. So I do think that is a way for Apple to go ahead and give us the ability of signing our own applications. So right now, Google is definitely, and Android is definitely going to be better in that standpoint. If you want to install your own applications, if you are more involved in the gaming space and if you want to install more applications like that, Android might be the better one for you. Now, I will say, if we're comparing like the Google Tensor 2 chipset versus the A15, A16 Bionic chips, I do think you're going to be getting overall better performance as a whole on an iPhone than on a Pixel. But I will argue that from this, performance segment, if you have an Android phone like a Galaxy S22 or the S23 that's going to be coming out, that will probably give you better performance than an iPhone, for looking at sheer performance. But other than that, that's basically two of the or three of the main things that I like looking at. Now, another thing we want to look at stock Android and iPhones is the cameras. So one thing I've always been able to tell you guys is that typically Androids, I would say iPhones give you better quality photos and videos, but Androids typically have more features built into the camera. Between now, though, there's been a lot of improvements that Apple's been doing on their cameras. So for comparing stock Android like a Google Pixel to an iPhone, I don't think you're going to be noticing crazy big differences. Like you have video mode, you have cinematic mode, but even just look at when I scroll through and I click at the bottom, look at how glitchy and choppy that looks. Sometimes when I'm doing that, it just doesn't look good at all. On an iPhone, though, if I go ahead and take a photo or if I just go ahead and go through the UI again, look at how much smoother it is. It is like so much of a smoother process. If I go and kind of put them side by side, hopefully you both can see it. But you can see that if I go and click over, it's just like little things like that that just kind of irk me sometimes. Like I feel like both of them could be doing, like I feel like I feel like Google could be doing a better job. You have a 90 hertz display here, 60 hertz here, but it looks so much smoother on something like an iPhone than on an Android. Now I do think Androids have really good cameras. I still think a lot of them do, but the stock camera UI I think could be better. I feel like if it's more in line with how Google or how Samsung has been doing it, I think that would be awesome. Samsung's UI, although it is a bit clunky, I would love the features of that camera on this, but the way it looks like on here, kind of. So that is the one thing. I mean, you don't really have too many features, too many things built in altogether. On an iPhone, you do have a lot of features built in. So you have good amount of features, not like a crazy amount, but I will tell you, from them adding cinematic mode to them adding, stabilization mode, now we've always had portrait mode and panorama mode. I do think they're starting to give us a lot more features into the camera, and I'm actually really happy that they're going down that direction. So I do think that in and of itself is another cool thing. And ultimately, what I can definitely tell you is those are kind of the main things that have changed, at least from last year up until this year. So there's a lot of differences. Obviously, you can, there's just lots of things. You have iMessage, FaceTime on here, but those things everybody kind of knows. For the last year and looking forward, I do think there's going to be lots of improvements going on. And I do think next year when we kind of revisit these two phones or, iOS and Android, I think they're going to be a lot more similar. And I wouldn't be surprised if Apple actually were to go ahead and give us the ability of installing third-party applications. And that would match it way more in line with something like a Google Pixel. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.